Good evening, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing the next speaker, or our key speaker. Miranda Sheffield carries a dedicated background in social justice, advocacy, and resistance. For the last 10 years, her primary form of work has been dedicated to work with Black and brown youth who have experienced foster care, providing reproductive health and STI training at the Edelman Children's Court, also assisting pregnant and expectant foster youth access informed health and care information. In 2014, Miranda began to organize with the Black Lives Matter LA chapter around the police murder of Ezell Ford, which led to BLM occupying the front of the LAPD office. In 2015, Miranda participated in a direct action by shutting down the 405 freeway in support of Black Xmas. In the last year, Miranda has spent her time living in London, attending SOAS University of London to pursue a master's degree in human rights law. While attending this university, she was actively involved in studying student organizing around racial educational disparities to supporting the nationwide UK universities teachers strike around pension cuts. Her research focuses on law, race, and colonialism, exploring the rich history of resistance by Maroons and fugitive states throughout the African diaspora. Miranda also spends the majority of her days and nights being a parent to a really amazing 14-year-old daughter. Miss Miranda Sheffield.
I want to first thank Trudy and everyone with the organization that invited me to come out. I'm really excited to share my presentation with you guys. I have put a lot of time into researching this particular area, and it's important to share it with as many people because I think, has anybody heard about Maroons? No. Okay, we got a couple. This is good. Great, good. So what I had originally did was this slide presentation is more of like an overview to just give you an idea about the basis of Maroons. My research focuses on looking at Maroons through an anti-surveillance tactics that they engaged in and exploring, and exploring how they were engaging in these tactics before we understood surveillance to be what it is today. So that's mostly.
Are you going to say what Maroons are?
I am.
Okay.
I am. Definitely. I'm just wanting to give a little background. So that is what's led me. So just to tell you about what led me to this research, this was probably in 2016. I've always had a fascination with this, exploring the history of the Maroons because I find this to be really interesting. So Maroons are, just to show you, this is just what I'll be talking about. We're going to explore how Maroons were in different countries and then explore specific tactics of resistance by fugitive slaves and then connecting these past acts into our current struggle that we're moving through today. Okay? Great. You guys were excited. Okay, great. Me too. So this is just to give you a history about the background of the Maroons. The word Maroons comes from the Spanish word cimarron, which basically meant like wild livestock and runaway livestock. And they applied that to whenever slaves were escaping from the different plantations. So that's when you hear Maroons is also usually connected to cimarron. And these are all the different places where you could find different either Maroon settlements or a presence of Maroons. Most of the time when we think about Maroons, we're talking about how they were forming settlements, but the very act of being able to flee from your plantation and to run and to dare to not ask permission is an act of marronage, which is the process of marooning. So I always believe that no matter, these are just a list of the few of the places where you can find them. all throughout the Caribbeans, all throughout Haiti. All of these places is where you would find maroons. And then in Haiti, that picture that I showed in the first hand, I wanted to show this because this is it's called an unknown slave, but it's actually a depiction of maroon that is in Haiti. And it's really powerful because in Haiti, a lot of the time when we think about the Haitian Revolution, we think about certain folks who were involved in it, which is Toussaint. We think about those who usually get all the notoriety. But the people who were really actually strategically a part of like helping the Haitian Revolution to get its spark were the Maroons. There was the rebel slaves that were in position to be able to say, okay, we're going to, go down and and fight for our freedom. And not just, because a lot of the times I think the Haitian Revolution is extremely powerful, but it gets kind of watered down because of this idea that slaves were fighting for class, like they were fighting to assimilate. The Maroons weren't fighting to assimilate. The Maroons were fighting to be able to be in opposition to what was represented at that time. Okay.
Yeah. Do you know about the Haitian uprising that took place 3 days ago on the 7th?
I do not. I do not. But I have.
I think there's been a blackout entirely.
We're gonna hold our questions and statements
Thank you.
to the end. And I'm really interested in hearing more about what you have to say.
Yeah,
I
want to know, because I do know that there has been stuff going on in Haiti within these last couple weeks and months. So that is really important to bring up and to talk about, because it's not getting a lot of media coverage. I didn't know something happened 3 days. But this is also important because in Haiti in 2010, after the earthquake happened and everything was demolished, it was a big symbolism of of joy to a lot of the Haitians because this was still up. It was there, it was still strong, and it gave them so much inspiration that those who fight for their freedom never die. So that's one. In Haiti, you could find maroons throughout stuff. And Jamaica, this is Queen Nanny. This is usually when we think about maroons. A lot of people like to talk about the Caribbeans and talk about how that's a particular area where you found a lot of activity of maroonage taking place. And Queen Nanny is and what I was going back to earlier. In 2016, I went to Jamaica, had a really eye-opening experience and got to learn so much more about maroons and about their contributions to stuff. And Queen Nanny, the people there, the way they talk about her is just extremely they honor her in such an amazing way, not just by the fact of her being a figurehead, but the fact that she was really military tactical. So when there was this time where the colonizers from Britain and from Spain were trying to, enclose and take their territory, Queen Nanny would do things that it would just be unbelievable. She would hide under dead bodies. She would position herself to where if somebody, she knew how to, they didn't think they knew how to use guns. The colonizers were always confused about that, but she was very tactical about that. And so they always prided themselves, not on this fact of sometimes when you think about this queen whole symbolism, you don't connect it to no, she was doing some really badass things. She was really out here protecting her people and her stuff, and she was the leader of the way. And she was also really important because Queen Nanny, there were the Windward Maroons, there were other Maroons throughout Jamaica, and what ended up happening, how the Maroons had peace because they were in war for such a long time with the British and with the Spaniards, but particularly with the British, they ended up signing a peace treaty. But Queen Nanny was the one who fought that whole thing because she just did not want to go down that lane at all. She was really opposed to signing a peace treaty. She wanted to keep the land and to keep their sovereignty in their own hands. So she was the last one to hold out, and that just didn't want to involve herself in doing that. So that's Jamaica, and then also here in the United States. So in the United States, all throughout the South, you have activities of the Maroons, which is I'm going to talk about more in depthly and how these Maroons were found throughout. But sometimes here in the United States, we focus on Florida, the Seminoles, as being like the Maroons that were here. But you could look in New Orleans, the St. Malo was a big settlement of Maroons. You could look in South Carolina. There was the Savannah Swamp Maroons, the Great Dismal Swamp Maroons. They were everywhere. So, and it became such a problem where you had specific laws that were being created just so that they could stop the movement of these Maroons, because it would be so hard to try to capture them and to stop them, you know, for stopping other people who were on the plantation from getting word that they could also escape and have life outside the plantation. And they structured these settlements in such a way, particularly in the swamps by Virginia, South Carolina, where it was very difficult for even the slave catchers to be able to get into. So you find them everywhere. They were all throughout stuff. Oh, that's the wrong one. And so what I'm going to do now, are we all on the same page about what Maroons are? We're clear about that? Because they were fugitive slaves that ran away and that would escape from the plantation and set up their own settlements, their own societies, or just be individuals that were fugitives, that just decided to be in rebellion against the whole idea of what the slave plantation had designed for their black bodies. And so this is just an overview, but I want to now, I printed out, I want to do readings of what my research particularly focuses on, okay? And I'm going to share that with you guys, and I hope you are able to engage with me about it. So the title of my work is called Marriage by Aspraxy, Exploring Anti-Surveillance Tactics and Maroon Liberation During the Late 17th, early 18th century. So that's what my work is primarily focused on. And so I'm looking at the Maroons, everything that we're talking about. I'm exploring the Maroons through understanding how they were engaging in anti-surveillance tactics and how those tactics were also, we can find them being used today. So I'm just going to first give an introduction about this work, and then I'm going to give you guys some key examples of these different tactics that Maroons were engaging in and their own technology. You think about technology now, this whole techie Silicon Valley thing. These fugitive slaves were engaging in some real ass technologies. I mean, like doing things that were just so brilliant that they had brought with them, you know? So let me first give you an overview of what my work looks at. So I'm challenging the way of how we understand surveillance and how we enter into that conversation around surveillance. So to begin, surveillance theorists and scholars from the field are heavily focused on only key historical areas. Specifically, the colonial occupation of the Philippines in 1898, where Colin Van Dermen expanded the first military gathering intelligence unit. This historical moment can be located as the first development of global surveillance technology. In addition, in his book Surveillance Studies, an overview, David Lyon discusses two main focus points in how we define surveillance. He describes how the word, derived from the French verb surveiller, literally to watch over, refers to processes in which special note is taken of certain human behaviors that go well beyond idle curiosity. Contemporary examples are limited to issues such as consumer behaviors, military surveillance, and computer data gathering. While these areas have been beneficial for how we understand the sensitive nature of how surveillance functions on different aspects of everyday life, it does not further understanding of the colonial and racial implications within their surveillance community. The continuous discussion of the panopticon has limited the ways in which we understand the study of surveillance. In this paper, I extend Simone Brown's term dark sousveillance. And dark sousveillance is basically, sousveillance means that you are the watcher, like instead of you being the person that's watched, sousveillance is saying that you become the watcher. So dark sousveillance is talking about how somebody who has a blocked body is able to use their body as a way to look back upon those who are looking at them, okay? So, and this is where I got the term from, Simone Brown. She uses dark sousveillance to situate the tactics employed to render oneself out of sight, and strategies used in the flight to freedom from slavery as a necessity of one's undersight. I attempt to use this as a lens to explore how the Maroons engaged in dark sousveillance during the late 1700s to the 1820s. I use Brown's work to situate the historical and contemporary ways of how we understand the practices of Maronage and how we can frame the actions of Maroons as anti-surveillance. My object is to discuss how the Maroons located in Jamaica, Haiti, and the USA were engaging in their own form of dark sousveillance in order to return the colonial gaze back onto the slave planter and onto the colonial government. By doing this, I hope to show how the current dynamics within surveillance studies is limited due to its inclusion of particular sites of history, its failure to extend to key historical moments of rupture, impeds our understanding not only of surveillance, but of particular acts of surveillance. So basically what I'm wanting to look at is how dark sousveillance is a way of how it was all about an act of resistance, saying that not only are our bodies being used as exploited labor, but our bodies are also being used to be able to watch and to be able to calculate our steps in order to get off the plantation, in order to escape being caught. All of these ways are how we understand dark sousveillance. And the Maroons interpreted practices of resistance not only in their physical form, but also through supernatural and geographical techniques. This study focuses on the fugitive slaves of the Maroons of Haiti, and as I mentioned before, New Orleans, and also in Jamaica. And so the reason why it's important, I feel, for us to focus on this particular area of history is that during the late 1700s to the early 1800s, especially particularly in Jamaica, there was not one year that didn't go by where there was some issue of uprising taking place. There wasn't a year where there wasn't any issues where they didn't have to worry about trying to stop the slaves from trying to overtake and to stop. So it needs to be very clear that the way of how we understand these acts of resistance, there was always levels of resistance taking place at every moment. It caused headaches, it caused issues at every step because they never let up. You know, to the time that they stepped their foot on there, they were always trying to find ways to get themselves into a better situation and to liberate themselves from having to be exploited on the slave plantation. And so I want to specifically talk about now what these acts of resistance look like. So when we think about surveillance, I'm trying to show how, as the slaves were escaping, they were finding different ways to say, we want to prevent being not only caught, but being able to have a space to build our radical imagination for a world yet thought of, or black futures for ourselves. So they're engaging in many different tactics to be able to explore this. And one of the ones that I want to use is that during, with Jamaica particularly, one of the things that they used were called protection papers. And these protection papers were ways that they found their own way to exploit how they can move out throughout the city, how they can move and be able to go and do things. So they would find these protection papers, which was, these protection papers were considered a colonial method of tracking. So like if this slave left the house I was always able to know, somebody could check and say, oh, who are you with? Where'd you go? So you're never able to fully just be able to roam freely because there was always some method of tracking your body in some way, right?
You're saying that they use these, is it dark SOUS, S-O-U-S, surveillance?
Yep.
So it's the fugitive slave watching the master's
Right.
tactics and learning from them.
Not learning from them because they already had the knowledge. What they were doing was they were being able to calculate strategically the movements of the slave master to prevent being able to either get caught or to be able to get goods, to slide under, and to do different things.
So those papers were, if they were out in the woods or something and slavery stopped them and they had those papers to show that they were supposed to be, they were able to travel back and
Right,
forth,
right. And also lanterns. So like when you think of how lanterns are also really another way of tracking, is that if you were out late at night, the illumination of that light was a way to let other slave planters know that, oh, here, it's a slave that's walking. You had to carry their lantern laws. The lantern laws were ways that if you had to be out for whatever reason, you always had to have this light to illuminate your body so that folks would know you were out. There's a tracking. And to talk about the protection papers were important because this is what the colonial slave masters used to be able to know what was going on and also to see if there were any like conspicuous things happening and stuff like that. So I'll give an example. So the protection papers were given in order for the colonial slave master to know your steps. But the slaves were able to use that fugitive slaves were able to use that as a way to say, no, we're going to use this to the best of our ability. And they did it in a very powerful way. So one of them, I'll use with Frederick Douglass. This is a quote from this. It was thus, however, the protection papers was one of the ways that Frederick Douglass traveled in the most open manner to Baltimore, to New York, and escaped from bondage to which he never returned. This form of open defiance under the colonial gaze can also be noted in Jamaica. A slave by the name of Sam, who belonged to Colonel Nedham of Port Antonio, secretly supplied gunpowder to 2 fugitive slaves in the Maroons. While on errands for his master, Sam would openly share space and conversation with other people from his settlement, Cujo and Kwashi, who were 2 Maroon spies. This form of open expression and lackluster command under the colonial gaze showed the weakness of the colonial gaze and its lack of ability to break the gathering spirit of those who desire to communicate with one another. So there was this open way of like, you had all of these, you were looked at, but it didn't stop folks from gathering. It didn't stop folks from being able to openly use the devices that were supposed to be used to track them to be able to get out. That's how Frederick Douglass was able to get from Baltimore, New York, because he forged these protection papers in a way to say, hey, I can go where I need to go. I can make this technology my own to get what I need to get. And another example, yes, this is the one I want to talk about. So during the time, this was here in the United States, like the Virginia, South Carolina area. This is, let me make sure I have the right one. Yeah, this is another example. So despite their vigilance, overseers and slaveholders often failed to catch the men and women who for months and sometimes for years came back secretly. One reason some Maroons could return to the plantations night after night without being caught was that they developed efficient but simple communication systems. In this, we can see how the Maroon/fugitive slaves developed their own secret tactics. And this is an example. He stayed undercover in the woods and such lurking places as the nature of the country provided in the daytime, and at night would cautiously approach his wife's cabin. When at an appointed signal, she would let him in and give him such food and care as his condition required. The slaves of the South were united in one particular of helping each other in such cases as this, and adopt ingenious telegrams as signals to communicate with each other. Ben's wife, in this instance, used the simple device of hanging a certain garment in particular spots easily be seen from Ben's covert, which he denoted that the coast was clear and no danger needed to be apprehended. The garment and the place to hang it had to be changed every day. The signals thusly true to the purpose saved Uncle Ben from capture. So this is someone who is a relative of Uncle Ben saying how like he had already escaped. He was already engaging in his maroon activity, but he still had to come back to the plantation. His family was still there. Being able to have access to certain type of resources was still there. But in order to not get caught, they were able to develop a way to say, okay, I'm going to put up a pink sheet. Safe. You can come. Tonight, I'm going to put it over here in this corner to say, no, someone's watching. You can't come tonight. So this was their own open, secret way of communicating to each other that I want to be able to make sure we're able to see each other, but I also want to make sure that we're safe. And it was openly, like no one knew that they were doing these communications, which is extremely powerful. And another one that's really one of my favorite ones is in Jamaica, they were always trying to go out and to catch the slaves and these maroons. And so they would put out word that, okay, tonight we're going to go on a slave catcher run and we're going to try to recover as many slaves as we can, and also those who are maroons and engaging in things. But they would have such an issue because word would get out and they wouldn't know how word was getting out. So this is one of them talking about it. We can look at accounts from slaveholder Charles McNaught and letters he wrote to his son Louis. An excerpt for this particular letter discusses a failed mission of attempting to capture maroons/runaway slaves. But they did not meet one that night or capture one, and attributed slowly to their intention having been communicated by house Negroes, who became acquainted with their intention, and it justly said that no overseer or planter should speak on such subjects even before a small houseboy or girl, as they communicate all they hear to others, who convey it to the spies of the runaways who are still at home. If any preparation for hunting them be made the day before, they will be informed by the night. So even the slaves who were inside the house, the little baby kids that you thought were just kind of there and not aimlessly paying attention, all of them were collecting and gathering intelligence. So you think about how the house was being situated and how it was a space of intelligence gathering, and how if something was taking place that day, they had spies throughout the whole, off and on the plantation, that can carry the word to the necessary person. And that's how we can understand differently about anti-surveillance tactics, and how the body that was particularly used as a way to exploit one's labor was being used to be able to protect each other, and how there were those who knew that. Everybody that was working inside the house weren't just there because of the notoriety that they may have gained. There were those there that were strategically saying that I'm hearing word about the maroons who live in the swamp and who've been able to harvest rice, who've been able to create their own boats, and we all want to get there. How do we make sure that we want to get there, but also make sure that we have resources for when they're ready to come, they have that. So there's a lot of strategic stuff taking place with those things. And then I'm going to provide, because I want to see if I'm going to provide some more examples of these different tactics. And this one is in Saint-Domingue, which is today known as Haiti. So as early as 1789 in Saint-Domingue, we can see that there may have been some awareness among the coloners that they would be incipient uprisings. While the colonists and planters might have had an ambiguous idea that a slave revolt was being organized, they had no real idea what would transpire due to the clandestine nature of planning and preparation that the Maroons and fugitive slaves engaged in. The truth is that the secret decisions made at Bois Common, which is the night where the Haitian Revolution took off, or was getting ready to take off, had been so well kept that the colonizers, according to Malenfant, who was a colonist in Haiti, had no inkling of this misfortune until it was signaled by the light of flames. The ability to retain such a high level of secrecy was foundational to the potency of having such strong clandestine anti-colonial movements. Furthermore, this illustrates how the historic act of the Haitian Revolution required Maroons and slaves to collaborate on and off the plantation. It is important to show the significance of the secrecy of the Maroons and the slaves who conspired during a time when the French government had increased measures and legislation to curtail the actions of Maroons and to prevent them from fleeing. The Haitian Maroons were constantly on the colonial radar due to the havoc they raised. There was always a need for additional policing and enforcement to help suppress the Maroons, especially from damaging the property of the slave owners. Furthermore, the law was utilized in an attempt to stifle the subversive tactics of anti-colonial Maroons. So with all this discussion around capitalism, they had a very clear idea that the best way to hit them hard was to destroy as much property as possible. And this is what the Maroons were doing. They were using these, and I want to show some actual, with the research that I engaged in, some newspaper correspondence that talk about these. So this, we can't read it, but I want to just show it to you guys. This is during the 1791, right when the Haitian Revolution was starting, and it talks about how it's talking about the insurrection, and they're saying, and this newspaper article is in the Times that was being sent back to Jamaica. The British were the colonizers of Jamaica during this time, and they had like basically what would be considered an ambassador in Haiti who was there when the Haitian Revolution took place. And this ambassador was sending information back to Jamaica to tell them, oh no, it's real. It's going down. No, it's not a joke. Like it's flames, it's happening, we have problems. And he's basically telling them like, we need to get, it may come to Jamaica. So there was all this concern, this panic, these issues of that, if those who are in Haiti, which is Saint-Domingue at the time, were going to spread this wildfire through all these other slave societies. And so the letter, for those who are not able to read it, the following is the whole substance of the letter written by Commander Affleck of Jamaica. And the letter states that upon the information of a serious insurrection had broken out among the Negroes and people of color at St. Domingo, Admiral Affleck went down with 2 frigates, the Blonde and the Alert, with the hopes of affording some assistance to the inhabitants. But finding this impracticable in an effectual manner, he returned to Jamaica and dispatched the Daphne to England with the information. The Daphne failed from Camp Francis the 24th of September. About 3 weeks, the disturbance had happened. The letter further relates that the insurgents were encamped near the capital to the number of 35,000 people. 4,000 were armed with muskets supplied by the Dutch and the Spaniards. So when you hear that they say it's supplied by the Dutch and Spaniards, I just want to give some context to that, because the British and the Dutch and the Spaniards, not only are they concerned about the slaves, but they're also concerned about taking each other's heads off as colonial masters, right? And so when you see that it says, oh, the Dutch provided them, you know, or the Spaniards, because they hate us British. So you don't really know who those weapons were provided by. But since this is coming from somebody who's British, they're like, oh, they had, like the slaves couldn't have gotten them themselves. Somebody had to supply them with that. So when you see when it says by the Dutch and Spaniards, it's something to really like challenge in a way because of who was sending this correspondence. So anyways, the remainder were armed with pitchforks and other weapons. The inhabitants had all retired within the fort, where they might remain until safety, until some relief arrived. So inhabitants actually means the settlers. So the people who were there, who were like totally scared that all the slaves were actually saying, y'all can't treat us like this anymore, were all like trying to either get off the island or were trying to escape. And the troops declined taking any part, and the Spaniards chose to give the appearance of preserving a perfect neutrality. So you hear that, right? Like this idea that, oh, they don't really want to assist us. They're trying to be, you know, they're trying to be neutral in how they're doing things is something to think about. And although they are strongly suspected of having cemented the disturbances, it is hoped that the Rona provisions and stores for so large a body would oblige the insurgents to return to their duty. The ravages they have committed are very great. About 300 white people have been murdered and upwards of 200 sugar and coffee plantations were destroyed.
Get them where it hurts.
Okay.
Get them where it hurts.
Right. Right. I'll read that part again because it's my favorite part. The ravages that they had committed are very great. About 300 white people have been murdered and upward of 200 sugar and coffee plantations were destroyed. Do you know how much that is? 200, right? 200 sugar and coffee plantations? They were not playing. Right. They were not playing. And so for them to do that, it took a lot. So I always like to insert that this is all of those who are in Haiti. They had a gentleman by the name of Buki Dukman, who also used the voodoo, who were very much so into their own spiritual practice. So it wasn't just them saying we're going to use our physical nature. They were also very much so inclined to like their own spiritual practices to be able to cause this uprising to be the level that it was. And so, let me see if there's anything else on this one. And so then I'm going to use 2 more examples and then we can go into Q&A. I just want to show you guys as much as possible. And then this is in Jamaica, another tactic that they were using as a way of gathering intelligence, as a way of subverting being looked upon. So what happened was during the time in Jamaica, there were right around 1795, right before the Haitian Revolution took place, there were these Maroon Wars happening. And they were caused through different issues. But this last one that took place, it was out of this disrespect that the Maroons felt. Because when the peace treaty was signed between the Maroons and the British, one of the things that wasn't so great was that the Maroons agreed that if they caught any fugitive slaves, that they would return those slaves. So that's why I'm trying to, it's important that, yes, Maroons did a lot of amazing things, but in some places, they were catching these slaves and they were returning them. But there's a lot of context to add to that whole thing, because I think that was only particular settlements within Jamaica. Not all of them did that. But it is important because I don't think I want to romanticize all of these different actions. But they did. So the second Maroon War that happened was that they felt disrespected because they made one of the Maroons got caught with something and there was some issue, and the British said basically their punishment would be that a fugitive slave or a slave would have to give them their lashes. And they were extremely disrespected by that. And so this is how the Second Maroon War broke out. In the time that it was going on, they had a meeting. One of the leaders from the old Maroon town came and met with the General Wadpole, and was like, look, the slave's name was Montagu James. He was the elder. He was like, look, we're gonna squash this. We don't want it. We're tired. Our feet hurt. We don't want the smoke no more. So we're just gonna leave this alone. We're no longer gonna engage you guys, and we're gonna retreat. And so he wrote this. General Wadpole was so excited. So he wrote this letter to the president during the time, Earl Blackhards, and told him, look, no more worries. They're going to cease fighting with us, and they're going to surrender themselves, and we're not going to have to worry about them causing us any more issues. So in this correspondence that's being written, is actually saying what actually took place was something totally opposite than that. So the same letter from which we copied the above mentions that on Monday last, 70 or 80 of these rebels met General Wadpole at Guard Hill and promised that on Wednesday they would, with the whole of their parties that were out, deliver themselves up. So that was on December 21st. And then on January 1st, another message comes saying, letters are received in town from Trelawney dated the 33rd, which state that the Maroons had yet shown no appearance of coming in. The dogs had been sent for that day and were to be at General Wadpole's on the same instance. And then on January 5th, hostilities had been renewed against the Maroons, who it now appears sought only to amuse us by the last truce in order to ascertain our strength and position to obtain supplies and provisions, while General Wadpole was treating with, perfecum. These slaves snapped his piece twice at him. The Maroons have taken refuge in the cockpits where the bloodhounds had been sent against them. So all they did was they said they were going to surrender, but they were basically coming to this general to assess, oh, what's your guys' level of strength? What weapons do you have? Oh, how can we gather some of our own material so that we're not surrendering? We have no intentions of surrendering. So how they were able to do that was actually really extremely tactical, that they were just using that moment to be able to assess what was really happening. And then this is my last one. And then we can do some Q&A. So this correspondence is the one that talks about how they're recording the colonial correspondence, are talking about, this is in Jamaica again, and they're talking about how, here they're discussing how same year, 1795, how they're so concerned that the Maroons are going in and just demolishing all of this property. So, and that this is when they had already escaped from the plantation, and they had already said, we're no longer, if you continue to try to come and get us, we're going to continue to have problems. And we're going to continue to cause issues for you. And we're going to continue to steal the stuff that we need in order to survive. So a party of Maroons consisting of 7 men and a girl appeared at Springfield Pen, the property of George M. Leland and Esquire, about 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. And after collecting every portable article that could be of service to them, particularly butter, salt, soap, candles, they set fire to the house, to the offices, and pressed a young Cromartie Negro to assist in carrying away the spoil. The Montepurer Company, under the command of Mr. Nanan at Seven Rivers Estate, about 5 miles distance, marched from there at 2 o'clock in the morning to join Lieutenant Hamilton, who with a detachment of the Brown Infantry were stationed 2 miles further at Withrow Station, and they were able to proceed to intercept the Maroons at Catapult, where, from the information received, it was supposed that they had already been their course. So this is really important because I think it's showing how there was all these different examples of how not only were they just resisting for the sake of resisting, but even when they went back, they would steal their stuff and they would burn down the houses. They weren't just saying we're coming in just to get what we need, but we're also saying we're going to continue to make you guys know that our presence is here. And to recognize how this is important. So I think for our time, I want to be mindful of time. I have my last area of focus that I looked at with connecting all this is looking how when we think about Skid Row and how this history connects to our present day, is though there are a lot of people who are on Skid Row that we always have to honor, are moving through different challenges due to the systemic racism, due to systemic oppression, capitalism, and all these different things, and just the overwhelming way of having to exist. But there's also people who live in Skid Row that are very clear that they pitch up their tent as an act of defiance, and that they are saying we're taking up a piece of this road that is for the city, that is for a municipality, and saying that we're going to be here. And no matter how many of the amount of police and law enforcement come here, we're going to be openly under the gaze of their surveillance of the city, of the police, and still be very clear in people's face that this is a part of my land. So you can connect what was taking place. With more time, I would go more into this, but you can connect what was taking place with the history of the Maroons to those who, which I call urban marronage, to people who are even on Skid Row that are saying, no matter how many people I have looking at me right now, and I can't escape to some swamp, I can't escape to some woods, I'm right here in this part of the city and defiantly saying I'm going to claim a piece of territory as my own, as an act of resistance, which is very powerful. So that's all I wanted to share. Hope you guys enjoyed it.